The cantina fell silent as Commander Zixtal entered, his 4 arms moving with the practiced precision of a veteran warrior. The Calarian's blue-scaled hide bore countless scars, each one a story of survival in the galaxy's most brutal conflicts. Other patrons, representing dozens of species from across the Galactic Federation, instinctively gave the decorated soldier space as he approached the bar. "Quantum whiskey," Zixtal ordered, his translator converting the guttural clicks of his native tongue into standard galactic. The bartender, a nervous Filian with 8 eyes, quickly complied. At a corner table, a group of young military cadets from various worlds watched the legendary commander with obvious awe. They whispered among themselves, too intimidated to approach but clearly wanting to hear tales from someone who had fought in the legendary human wars. Zixtal noticed their stares and felt the familiar weight of memory settle on his shoulders. It had been 3 cycles since the wars ended. 3 cycles since humanity had been granted full membership in the Federation, after proving themselves the most terrifying and effective warriors the galaxy had ever seen. Most citizens preferred to forget those dark times, to pretend the conflicts had been just another territorial dispute. But Zixtal remembered. He remembered everything. The youngest cadet, barely old enough for military service, finally worked up the courage to approach. The Zephyrian's translucent skin flickered with nervous bioluminescence as she spoke. "Commander Zixtal, sir, we're sorry to bother you, but we're studying xenological warfare at the Academy. Could you tell us about the human wars? Our instructors won't discuss the details." Zixtal turned his primary eyes toward the group, while his secondary pair continued scanning the room out of habit. The other cadets had joined their brave companion, forming a small semicircle around his table. He recognized the hunger in their faces, the same desperate need to understand that had driven him to request frontline assignments during humanity's integration trials. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing with his lower left arm toward the empty chairs. "But understand this. What I'm about to tell you isn't propaganda or sanitized historical records. This is truth, raw and unfiltered. The human military doctrine changed everything we thought we knew about warfare." The cadets settled into their seats, leaning forward eagerly. Zixtal took a long drink of his whiskey, feeling the familiar burn as it slid down his throat. Where to begin? How could he possibly explain to these youngsters what it meant to face humanity in combat? "I commanded the 47th Calarian Strike Force during the Proxima incident," he began, his voice low but carrying clearly in the now quiet cantina. Other patrons had begun eavesdropping, though they pretended to focus on their own conversations. "We were considered elite troops, the best the Federation had to offer. Each of my soldiers had survived at least 12 major engagements. We had faced the Thaxian Empire, the Mordant Collective, even the machine armies of the core worlds. We thought we understood war." He paused, remembering the confidence they had felt boarding their ships for what was supposed to be a simple police action. Humanity had been causing problems in their sector, refusing to acknowledge Federation authority and continuing to expand their territory without permission. The plan was straightforward: demonstrate superior force, accept their surrender, and integrate them into the galactic community under proper supervision. The humans had established a colony on Kepler 442b without authorization, Zixtal continued. Our intelligence suggested a population of maybe 50,000, mostly civilians with minimal defensive capabilities. Standard protocol called for orbital bombardment followed by ground occupation. Simple, clean, effective. The Zephyrian cadets' bioluminescence pulsed with anticipation. But something went wrong. Zixtal's mandibles clicked in what other species had learned to recognize as bitter amusement. Wrong doesn't begin to cover it. When we dropped out of hyperspace in the Kepler system, we expected to find a few hastily constructed settlements and maybe some mining equipment. Instead, we found a fortress. He gestured with his upper arms, painting a picture in the air. The humans had somehow turned an entire planet into a weapon. They'd moved asteroids into orbital defensive positions, each one bristling with kinetic accelerators and missile pods. The planet's surface was covered in interconnected bunker complexes that our sensors couldn't properly map, and the radiation signatures, they suggested power generation capabilities that should have been impossible for such a small colony. The cadets exchanged glances. Even in their limited studies, they'd learned that such massive fortifications would require decades to construct and resources that a new colony shouldn't possess. "How did they build all of that so quickly?" asked a Dromalian cadet, his rocky hide shifting color with curiosity. "That was our first lesson about humans," Zixtal replied. "They don't think like us. When every other species in the galaxy establishes a new colony, they focus on sustainability and comfort. They build homes, farms, entertainment facilities. Humans build weapons first and ask questions later." He took another drink, remembering the heated discussions in the command briefing room as they'd tried to make sense of the intelligence reports. Admiral Korthan decided to proceed with the orbital bombardment despite the unexpected defenses. He believed our superior numbers and technology would overcome whatever primitive weapons the humans had managed to construct. We had 47 capital ships, including 3 dreadnoughts. The humans had never seen vessels of that size. The cantina had grown completely silent now. Even the bartender had stopped cleaning glasses to listen. "The bombardment began at 800 Standard Time," Zixtal continued, his voice taking on the measured cadence of an official report. "Our targeting computers identified what appeared to be command centers and weapons installations. The first salvo should have eliminated any organized resistance." He paused, his primary eyes focusing on something far beyond the cantina walls. "The humans didn't even try to stop the bombardment. They let our weapons hit their designated targets, let us think we were succeeding. It wasn't until our sensors detected massive energy spikes across the planet's surface that we realized we'd been played." The Zephyrian cadet's skin had turned a deep purple with anxiety. "Played how?" "The targets we'd destroyed were decoys, elaborate constructions designed to look like important installations from orbit. While we were congratulating ourselves on our accuracy, the humans were activating weapon systems that our sensors had dismissed as geological formations." Zixtal's 4 hands clenched simultaneously as he remembered the moment everything had gone wrong. "The first indication was when 3 of our escorts simply vanished. Not destroyed, vanished. 1 second they were maintaining formation, the next they were gone. No explosion, no debris field, nothing. Our sensors showed empty space where they'd been moments before." The Dromalian cadet's hide had shifted to a sickly green color. "What kind of weapon could do that?" "We still don't know," Zixtal admitted. "Human military technology operates on principles that our scientists struggle to understand. They don't just build bigger guns or stronger shields. They weaponize physics itself." He gestured to the bartender for another drink, noting how the Filian's multiple eyes were all focused on him with obvious terror. Admiral Korthan ordered an immediate tactical withdrawal to reassess the situation. That's when we learned the second important lesson about human warfare. They don't believe in letting enemies escape to regroup. The artificial gravity in the cantina seemed to intensify as Zixtal's tone grew darker. As our fleet began to pull back, the humans revealed more of their capabilities. Those asteroids we detected in orbit weren't just defensive platforms, they were mobile weapons platforms. They moved with impossible speed and agility, swarming our ships like insects attacking much larger predators. He took a sip of his fresh drink, gathering his thoughts. Each asteroid was essentially a massive kinetic weapon wrapped around a sophisticated AI core. They would accelerate to incredible speeds and then detonate their engines at the moment of impact, turning themselves into directed nuclear explosions. Our shields, designed to deflect energy weapons and conventional missiles, were useless against such attacks. The young cadets sat in stunned silence, trying to process the implications of what they were hearing. Kamikaze tactics were known throughout the galaxy, but usually employed only by desperate forces facing certain defeat. The humans had apparently built their entire defensive strategy around the concept. But the asteroids were just the beginning, Zixtal continued. While our fleet was being harassed by the mobile platforms, the planet's surface installations began revealing their true nature. What we'd thought were mining operations turned out to be mass drivers, enormous magnetic accelerators capable of launching projectiles at significant fractions of light speed. The Dramalian cadet's rocky hide was now cycling through colors rapidly, a sure sign of extreme stress. How is that even possible? The power requirements alone? Humans don't think in terms of limitations, Zixtal explained. Where other species see engineering challenges, they see opportunities for innovation. That colony had been funneling 90% of its industrial capacity into military applications from day one. They'd built a planetary defense grid that could threaten capital ships from millions of kilometers away. He paused to let that sink in. By the time Admiral Corthan realized the true scope of what we were facing, we'd already lost 12 ships and thousands of personnel, but the humans weren't finished with their surprises. The cantina's lighting seemed to dim as Zixtal's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The final revelation came when our remaining sensors detected massive energy signatures emerging from what we'd thought was empty space beyond the planet's orbit. The humans had somehow concealed an entire fleet of warships, waiting for us to commit fully to the engagement. Several patrons at nearby tables had given up all pretense of not listening and had moved closer to hear better. Their ships were unlike anything in our databases. They didn't rely on conventional hull armor or energy shields. Instead, they seemed to exist in a state of controlled spatial distortion, making them nearly impossible to target accurately. Our weapons would pass right through them, while their return fire struck with devastating precision. The Zephyrian cadets' bioluminescence had faded to almost nothing. How many ships did they have? Intelligence reports suggested the human fleet numbered around 30 vessels, but their combat effectiveness was unlike anything we'd ever encountered. Each human ship fought like an entire squadron, coordinating attacks with machine precision while adapting to our tactics in real time. Zixtal finished his drink and stared into the empty glass. Admiral Corthan made the decision to attempt a fighting withdrawal toward the hyperspace jump point. He ordered all remaining ships to form a defensive formation and prepare for emergency translation. It should have been a textbook disengagement. The silence in the cantina was now complete, every patron hanging on the commander's words. The humans anticipated our withdrawal route perfectly. As we approached the jump point, we discovered they'd somehow managed to destabilize the local space-time enough to prevent hyperspace translation. We were trapped in the system with no way to escape. He looked up at the cadets, seeing his own memories of that terrible moment reflected in their horrified expressions. That's when I learned the most important lesson about humans. They don't just fight to win. They fight to teach their enemies that challenging humanity is a mistake that no one should ever make twice. Commander Zixtal ordered another quantum whiskey, his 4 hands trembling slightly as the memories continued to surface. The cadets remained frozen in their seats, afraid to break the spell of his narrative. Around them, the cantina had become an impromptu amphitheater, with dozens of patrons gathered to hear first-hand accounts of humanity's terrifying military capabilities. With hyperspace translation impossible, Admiral Corthan had no choice but to commit to a direct engagement, Zixtal continued, his voice carrying the weight of old trauma. Our remaining 28 ships formed a battle sphere, a defensive formation that had served the Federation well for thousands of years. Each vessel could provide covering fire for its neighbors while maintaining overlapping shield coverage. It was textbook military doctrine. The Calarian commander's secondary eyes continued their habitual scanning, while his primary pair focused on the assembled listeners. The human fleet approached with what appeared to be reckless abandon. Their ships broke formation, and scattered across a wide front, seeming to ignore basic tactical principles. Our tactical computers predicted an easy victory. Scattered forces are vulnerable forces, after all. He paused, remembering the false confidence that had filled the fleet's communication channels. That confidence lasted exactly 17 seconds after the engagement began. The humans opened fire with weapons that didn't register on our sensors until the moment of impact. Invisible beams that somehow bypassed our shields and struck critical systems with surgical precision. In the first exchange, 3 of our heavy cruisers lost main power, and 2 destroyers suffered complete engine failure. A Vorthan patron near the bar made a sound of disbelief, his tentacles writhing anxiously. Invisible weapons? That's impossible. Energy has to propagate through some medium. Zixtal turned his attention to the interruption, recognizing the species' reputation for scientific skepticism. I thought the same thing until I witnessed it personally. Human weapons technology operates on principles that challenge our fundamental understanding of physics. They don't just use different materials or more powerful energy sources. They weaponize aspects of reality that we never considered military applications. He gestured with his upper left arm toward the viewport, showing the star-filled space beyond the station. Later analysis suggested they were using controlled gravitational waves as weapon platforms. Gravity doesn't interact with electromagnetic shields, so our defenses were completely useless. The beams would pass through our hulls and selectively disrupt specific molecular bonds in critical components. The implications sent ripples of unease through the gathered crowd. If humans could weaponize gravity itself, what other fundamental forces might they have turned to military purposes? But the gravitational weapons were just their opening move, Zixtal continued. As our formation began to falter, the human ships revealed their true tactical doctrine. Each vessel was apparently equipped with what they called quantum displacement drives, propulsion systems that allowed them to exist in multiple probable locations simultaneously. The Dromalian cadet's hide had settled into a consistent gray color that indicated complete bewilderment. Multiple locations? That doesn't make any sense. It doesn't have to make sense, Zixtal replied grimly. It just has to work. And it worked terrifyingly well. Our targeting computers couldn't lock onto them because they weren't technically in any single location long enough to be targeted. They would appear, fire, and vanish before our return shots could reach them. He took a long drink, feeling the familiar burn of the quantum whiskey. Admiral Korthan ordered all ships to switch to area effect weapons. If we couldn't target them precisely, we would saturate entire volumes of space with destructive energy. It was a desperate tactic, but desperation was all we had left. The cantina's atmospheric recyclers hummed quietly as Zixtal gathered his thoughts. The humans adapted to our new strategy within minutes. Their ships began moving in perfect coordination, creating what their commanders called probability storms, regions of space where the laws of physics became negotiable. Our area effect weapons would enter these zones and simply cease to exist, their energy dispersed across multiple dimensional layers. A Calarian engineer at a nearby table spoke up, his translator rendering his clicks into skeptical tones. Brother Warrior, with respect, what you describe violates conservation of energy. Weapons fire cannot simply vanish. Zixtal's mandibles clicked in dark amusement. Tell that to the crews of the ships that vanished along with their weapons. The humans had somehow learned to manipulate the boundary between normal space and subspace. Energy that entered their probability storms was redirected into parallel dimensions where it could do no harm to the human fleet. The engineer's translator fell silent, unable to process the implications of what he'd heard. By this point in the engagement, our losses had become catastrophic, Zixtal continued. 15 ships destroyed or disabled, thousands of personnel dead or missing. But Admiral Corthan made the decision that would haunt all of us who survived. He authorized the use of stellar cascade weapons. A collective gasp went through the assembled crowd. Stellar cascade weapons were banned by every civilized government in the galaxy, devices capable of triggering artificial supernovas that could sterilize entire star systems. The Admiral's reasoning was sound, Zixtal said quietly. If humans possessed technology that could challenge the Federation's military supremacy, they represented an existential threat to galactic civilization. Better to destroy them completely than risk their spread to other systems. The Zephyrian cadet's bioluminescence flickered weakly. But using such weapons, the colony had civilians, families. War makes monsters of us all, Zixtal replied sadly. I supported the decision at the time. We all did. The human military capabilities we'd witnessed suggested they could conquer the entire galaxy if left unchecked. He stared into his glass, seeing reflections of old horrors. The dreadnought Eternal Victory began charging its stellar cascade projector, a process that would take approximately 30 minutes to complete. Meanwhile, the remaining ships formed a protective screen to ensure the weapon could be deployed successfully. The artificial gravity in the cantina seemed to fluctuate as Zixtal's emotional state affected his natural bioelectric field. That's when we learned the final, most terrifying truth about human warfare doctrine. They had been monitoring our communications throughout the entire engagement. They knew what we were planning. He looked up at the cadets, seeing his own past innocence reflected in their faces. Instead of attempting to stop the stellar cascade weapon, the humans transmitted a message to our fleet. It was broadcast on all channels simultaneously, impossible to jam or block. The voice was calm, almost conversational, speaking perfect galactic with what our xenolinguists later identified as an accent typical of Earth's Northern American continent. Zixtal's voice took on a different cadence as he recited the message from memory. Admiral Corthan, this is Fleet Commander Sarah Chen of the Human Colonial Defense Force. We note your intention to deploy stellar cascade weapons against our system. Before you complete that action, we'd like you to consider the following information. Our deep space monitoring stations have been tracking your fleet since you entered this galactic arm. We know the location of your home worlds, your supply bases, your civilian colonies. We know where your families live. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of someone's drink glass hitting the floor. You have brought 47 warships to our single system. Zixtal continued the recitation. We have sent exactly one ship to each of 47 Federation worlds. Each of these ships carries a single stellar cascade weapon identical to the one you are preparing to use against us. If our system's star goes nova, every Federation homeworld will follow within minutes. The Dramalian cadet made a choking sound. That's impossible. No one could move that many weapons into position without being detected. The humans had been planning for this war for years before we even knew they existed, Zixtal explained. While the Federation was focused on internal politics and territorial disputes, humanity was studying us, learning our weaknesses, mapping our infrastructure, preparing for the inevitable conflict they knew would come. He finished his drink and signaled for another. But the message wasn't finished. Commander Chen continued. However, we are not monsters. We offer you a choice. Stand down your weapons and withdraw from our system. In exchange, we will share with the Federation the technical specifications for faster-than-light communication systems, anti-gravity technology, and medical treatments that could extend the lifespan of every sentient being in the galaxy by centuries. Refuse our offer and watch your civilizations burn. The cantina had become so quiet that the hum of the life support systems seemed deafeningly loud. Admiral Corthan demanded proof of the human claims. Within minutes, Our home command received detailed sensor readings of human ships in orbit around every major Federation world. The vessels were completely undetectable except when they chose to reveal themselves. They had been there for months, waiting. Zixtal accepted his fresh drink with a nod of gratitude to the trembling bartender. The technological gap between humanity and the rest of the galaxy was even wider than we'd realized. While we had been content to refine existing technologies, humans had been reinventing the fundamental principles of physics. They didn't just build better weapons, they weaponized reality itself. The Vorthon scientist spoke up again, his tentacles now completely still. The medical treatments mentioned, were they real? The human offer was completely genuine, Zixtal confirmed. Within a year of the treaty signing, Federation medical technology had advanced by centuries. Cancer, genetic diseases, even aging itself became treatable conditions. Human physicians worked alongside our best scientists to implement treatments we hadn't thought possible. He paused to take a drink. But the most disturbing aspect of the entire encounter was yet to be revealed. As our fleet prepared to withdraw, Commander Chen transmitted one final message. Zixtal's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Admiral, we want you to understand something important. Everything you have witnessed today represents roughly 2% of our actual military capabilities. We showed you just enough to ensure you would take our offer seriously. We have weapons that could sterilize your entire galaxy without using stellar cascade devices. We have ships that exist outside of normal space-time entirely. We have soldiers that have been enhanced beyond anything your scientists thought biologically possible. We chose to negotiate because we believe in peace, not because we feared your fleet. The implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud. If the devastating capabilities they'd witnessed represented only a fraction of human military power, what horrors remained hidden in their arsenal? The withdrawal proceeded without further incident, Zixtal continued. Admiral Korthan was relieved of command and subjected to a formal inquiry. The Federation Council declared the Kepler incident classified at the highest levels. Official records show only that first contact with humanity resulted in a peaceful treaty of cooperation. He looked around at the gathered faces, seeing the same mixture of fascination and terror that he'd felt that day. But those of us who were there know the truth. Humanity didn't join the Federation as equals. They joined as our superiors, graciously choosing to let us pretend otherwise. The quantum whiskey had loosened Zixtal's tongue, but the memories flowing forth were as sharp as the day they'd been carved into his mind. The assembled crowd had grown to include nearly every patron in the cantina, with some standing on chairs to get a better view of the legendary commander. The young cadets remained frozen in their original positions, afraid that any movement might break the spell of revelation. The formal treaty negotiations lasted 6 months, Zixtal continued, his 4 hands wrapped around his glass as if seeking comfort from its solid reality. I was part of the Federation security detail assigned to observe the proceedings. What we witnessed during those meetings changed our understanding of humanity even more than the battle itself. The Calarians' secondary eyes tracked movement near the cantina's entrance as a group of human civilians entered. They were immediately recognizable by their distinctive bipedal structure and relatively small stature compared to most galactic species. The humans noticed the crowd gathered around Zixtal but politely took seats at the far end of the bar, apparently unaware they were the subject of discussion. The human negotiation team consisted of only 12 individuals, Zixtal said, lowering his voice slightly out of respect for the newcomers. No massive diplomatic corps, no teams of legal experts, no military advisors. Just 12 humans who seemed to understand galactic politics better than beings who had studied it for centuries. He paused to observe the humans at the bar, noting how they moved with an economy of motion that suggested either exceptional physical conditioning or artificial enhancement. Even in civilian clothes, they maintained the subtle alertness of trained soldiers. The lead negotiator was a human female named Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell. She appeared to be middle-aged by human standards, unremarkable in every way except for her eyes. When she looked at you, it felt like she could see through your skull directly into your thoughts. The Dromalian cadet followed Zixtal's gaze toward the humans and whispered, "Are they all like that? Enhanced somehow?" "We didn't understand it at the time," Zixtal replied quietly. "But every human we encountered during the negotiations displayed cognitive abilities that should have been impossible for an unaugmented organic brain. They could process information faster than our computer systems, remember every detail of conversations that had occurred weeks earlier, and predict our negotiating positions with uncanny accuracy." The Zephyrian cadet's bioluminescence pulsed with curiosity. How did they become so advanced? Their homeworld was only discovered a few decades ago. Zixtal's mandibles clicked in what other species had learned to recognize as grim amusement. That question haunted Federation intelligence services for months after the treaty signing. Human history, as they presented it, showed thousands of years of relatively normal technological development, followed by an explosive acceleration that began approximately 2 centuries ago. He took a sip of his drink, organizing his thoughts. According to their records, humanity had developed artificial intelligence systems that could recursively improve themselves. Each generation of AI became more capable than the last, until they reached what humans called technological singularity, a point where the rate of advancement became essentially infinite. A Calarian engineer at a nearby table leaned forward with obvious interest. "Self-improving AI? That explains the rapid technological advancement. But how did they avoid the inevitable AI rebellion? Every species that has attempted such research has faced extinction when their creations turned against them." "That's where human psychology proved unique," Zixtal explained. "Instead of trying to control their artificial intelligences through programming restrictions or physical limitations, they integrated with them completely. Every human you see today is essentially a hybrid consciousness, part organic brain, part digital intelligence." The implications sent murmurs of unease through the gathered crowd. The concept of voluntary fusion with artificial minds was considered abhorrent by most galactic species, associated with loss of individual identity and spiritual death. "Dr. Hartwell explained it to me during one of the negotiation breaks," Zixtal continued. "She said that humans had faced the same choice that every technological species eventually encounters: surrender to their AI creations, attempt to suppress them, or find a way to coexist. They chose a fourth option that no one else had considered: voluntary synthesis." The cantina's lighting seemed to dim as Zixtal's voice took on a more serious tone. "The enhancement process begins in early childhood. Human infants receive neural implants that grow with their developing brains, creating seamless integration between biological and artificial intelligence. By adulthood, they can access the collective knowledge of their entire species instantaneously while retaining their individual personalities and creativity." One of the humans at the bar turned slightly, and Zixtal caught a glimpse of her eyes. They held the same unsettling depth he remembered from Dr. Hartwell, as if vast intelligence lurked behind an apparently normal facade. "During the treaty negotiations, we attempted to probe the limits of human knowledge," Zixtal said. "Our experts prepared questions about obscure historical events, complex mathematical theorems, even classified Federation technology that humans should have had no access to. Dr. Hartwell answered every query instantly and accurately." The Vorthan scientist's tentacles writhed with skepticism. "Impossible. No single individual could possess such comprehensive knowledge." "She wasn't a single individual," Zixtal corrected. "She was connected to every other enhanced human through quantum entanglement networks that operated instantaneously across any distance. When we asked her a question, She could consult the collective knowledge and experience of billions of human minds in real time. The silence that followed was broken only by quiet conversations in dozens of languages as patrons struggled to process the implications. But the truly terrifying aspect wasn't their individual capabilities, Zixtal continued. It was their collective strategic thinking. Humans plan on timescales that dwarf the longest-lived species in the galaxy. They think in terms of geological ages, stellar evolution cycles, even the eventual heat death of the universe. He gestured toward the viewport showing distant stars. During one negotiation session, Dr. Hartwell casually mentioned that humanity had already begun preparations for the day when our galaxy would collide with Andromeda, billions of years in the future. They're not just planning for their own survival, they're planning for the survival of every sentient species that has ever existed. The Zephyrian cadets' bioluminescence had faded to almost nothing. How can they think so far ahead? Even our longest-term planning doesn't extend beyond a few centuries. Artificial intelligence doesn't experience time the way we do, Zixtal explained. A digital consciousness can run simulations of entire civilizations in seconds, testing millions of possible futures to identify optimal strategies. When every human can access that kind of computational power, their entire species becomes a single vast planning organism. The Dramalian cadet's hide shifted to deep purple. But what do they want? Why join the Federation at all if they're so far beyond us? Zixtal turned his attention back to the cadets, seeing echoes of his own confusion from those early days of human contact. That question kept Federation analysts awake for months after the treaty signing. Dr. Hartwell finally provided an answer during the final negotiation session. She said that humans valued diversity of thought above all else. Despite their technological advantages, they recognized that biological consciousness possessed qualities that pure artificial intelligence couldn't replicate. He paused to finish his drink. According to human philosophy, creativity, intuition, and emotional intelligence emerge from the chaos of organic neural networks. They believed that a purely digital civilization would eventually stagnate, becoming too logical and predictable to continue growing. They needed us to remain human, in the metaphorical sense. The concept sent ripples of unease through the crowd. The idea that humanity's vastly superior civilization somehow depended on the contributions of lesser species was both comforting and deeply unsettling. The treaty established humanity as a senior partner in the Federation, Zixtal continued. Officially, they have the same voting rights as any other member species. Unofficially, no major decision is made without human approval. They guide galactic policy through subtle influence rather than direct control. One of the humans at the bar stood and approached their table. She was tall even by human standards, with the distinctive silver-flecked irises that marked her as heavily enhanced. Her movements carried the fluid grace of someone who had transcended normal physical limitations. "Commander Zixtal," she said, her voice carrying the slight harmonic distortion typical of human speech enhancers. "I hope you don't mind the interruption. I'm Dr. Sarah Chen. We've met before." The cantina fell completely silent. This was the same human who had delivered the ultimatum that ended the Kepler incident, though she appeared unchanged despite the passage of 3 years. "Fleet Commander Chen," Zixtal replied formally, rising from his seat with the practiced precision of a career military officer. "I didn't expect to encounter you here." "Please, just Sarah now," she said with a slight smile. "I've retired from active military service. These days I work in xenological research, studying how different species adapt to technological enhancement." Her eyes swept over the assembled crowd, and Zixtal noticed that every patron seemed to shrink back slightly under her gaze. "I hope my friend here hasn't been filling your heads with too much military propaganda," she continued with obvious amusement. The Kepler incident was an unfortunate misunderstanding that could have been avoided with better communication. The Zephyrian cadet found her voice with obvious effort. Dr. Chen, is it true that humans have weapons that could destroy entire galaxies? Sarah's expression became more serious. That's classified information, but I can tell you that humanity's military doctrine is based on deterrence rather than destruction. We build overwhelming capabilities to ensure we never have to use them. She looked directly at Zixtal. The commander's account is accurate, though perhaps a bit dramatic. We revealed just enough of our capabilities to make peaceful coexistence preferable to continued conflict. Zixtal's mandibles clicked nervously. Dr. Chen, may I ask why you're really here? Research, she replied simply. I'm studying how different species process information about human capabilities. Your storytelling tonight has provided valuable data about Federation attitudes toward technological enhancement. The implications were chilling. Had the entire evening been orchestrated? Were the cadets' questions spontaneous or part of some larger human experiment in social manipulation? Don't worry, Sarah added, apparently reading his thoughts from his body language. This wasn't a setup. I happened to be on the station conducting interviews and noticed the crowd gathering. Professional curiosity got the better of me. She turned to address the assembled patrons directly. I want you all to understand something important. Humans don't consider ourselves superior to other species. We've simply chosen a different path of development. Every species in the galaxy has unique qualities that contribute to our collective knowledge. The Vorthon scientist gathered enough courage to speak. Dr. Chen, why did humans choose technological enhancement over natural evolution? Because we could, she replied simply. When we developed the capability to improve ourselves, the choice became inevitable. Staying purely biological would have meant accepting limitations that no longer needed to exist. She gestured toward Zixtal. The commander's account focused on our military capabilities, which is understandable given his background. But our greatest achievements have been in medicine, agriculture, and scientific research. We've eliminated disease, hunger, and ignorance from human space. The Dramalian cadet's hide shifted to a hopeful green. Could other species undergo the same enhancements? Sarah's expression became carefully neutral. Theoretically, yes, but the process would fundamentally change what it means to be Dramalian or Calarian or any other species. We believe diversity is more valuable than uniformity. She turned back to Zixtal. Commander, thank you for sharing your experiences. Truth, even uncomfortable truth, serves everyone better than comfortable lies. With that, she returned to her companions at the bar, leaving the gathered crowd to process what they'd heard. Zixtal settled back into his chair, feeling emotionally drained by the evening's revelations. The cadets remained transfixed, struggling to integrate their new understanding of humanity's role in galactic affairs. Commander, the Zephyrian cadet said quietly, what happens now? If humans are so far beyond us, what's our purpose in the galaxy? Zixtal considered the question carefully before responding. The same purpose we've always had, to grow, to learn, to become more than we were. Humans may have shown us one possible path of development, but they're not the only path. He looked around at the diverse collection of species represented in the cantina. The galaxy is vast enough for many different kinds of consciousness. Our role isn't to compete with humanity, it's to contribute our unique perspectives to the collective advancement of all sentient life. The evening's conversations gradually resumed their normal patterns, but Zixtal noticed that every patron occasionally glanced toward the humans at the bar. The comfortable assumptions about galactic hierarchy had been shattered, replaced by a new understanding of humanity's true place in the cosmic order. As the night wore on and the crowd began to thin, Zixtal reflected on how much the galaxy had changed since first contact with humanity. The wars, the terror, the final desperate negotiations, all of it had led to a new age of unprecedented cooperation and technological advancement. Perhaps Dr. Chen was right. Perhaps it had all been just a misunderstanding that better communication could have prevented. But Zixtal remembered the cold calculation in her voice during that final transmission at Kepler, the casual mention of weapons that could sterilize galaxies. Humanity had chosen to be benevolent rulers rather than tyrants, but the choice remained theirs to make. And that, more than any weapon or technology, was what truly made them the most terrifying force in the galaxy.